In recent times, there seemed to be a rush to tell our story. Nothing is wrong with that. So there was a blossoming, a flowering of memoirs, autobiographies, biographies. Welcome to oral tradition and another adventure in Guyanese literature. Let's also welcome Professor Emeritus Charlotte Williams, who is from Northern Wales, but she likes to move from place to place. And right now she is meeting us from somewhere in Australia. Hello, and welcome, Charlotte.
Good.
Welcome from Guyana. A warm welcome.
Thank you. I'm speaking to you from Adelaide in Australia.
Right. I think the West Indies cricket team is in Australia right now.
They are, yes.
Yeah, I said earlier there seems to be a rush to tell our story, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's a story, there's a book or two in each of us. Your book, Sugar and Slate, is your story, but your story involves other people, of which we will hear of later. The name, I mean, it speaks for itself, Sugar and Slate. But why did you put sugar before slate and why not slate before sugar?
Oh, I haven't been asked that question before. This is very interesting. Um, I wrote the book around 1998 when my sadly lost my father, Denis Williams, and soon after 2001 I lost my mother. And of course, the sugar and slate reflects my heritages,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Guyanese, Welsh. And I think the phrase that comes to mind most popularly is sugar and spice. So it's a kind of twist on that because I wanted to use these two commodities that reflected my heritage. So
Yeah.
instead of sugar and spice, it becomes sugar and slate.
And you're caught between and betwixt because
That's exactly
that's right, because it's something to do with your search for identity. Is that correct?
Yes. Now, the book on one level is about me thinking about my heritages and how to kind of reconcile this idea of home when you come from two places. But on the other hand, it's a bigger story about an experience that I didn't feel had been very much rehearsed at that time, certainly not in Wales. So it's also a story that speaks to those countries, Wales and Guyana, on a bigger level than me, if you know what I mean.
You mentioned that icon, Guyanese icon, Denis Williams. Dennis is part, that's your father, is part of this memoir, right? Um,
Yeah.
Perhaps even overshadowing your story. Tell us a bit about your family background, and then we'll move on with.
Yes.
Yeah. He
Well,
is big.
I think it, it's really wonderful that Dennis is so recognised in his own time and posthumously,
Yes.
both in Guyana and, of course, more latterly in the UK. And my story tells a little bit about growing up with this fellow, this wonderful dad, as he was an artist, an archaeologist, a university lecturer, a charming storyteller, and so on and so forth. And I did want to reflect some of that experience and the influence that he had on me, and the significance, I think, of his thinking about European culture and how that affects our thinking about these big themes about imperialism and colonialism and how that shapes the work that you do.
Yeah.
So all of that comes into the story.
Yep. It brings up the point that he had refused when he was doing the research on the book Ancient Guyana. He refused funding from the Western society or from the West. All right.
Yes, that was one of his enduring principles. And I think, the early days he's working in Africa at a time when Africa's having it, many countries in Africa are having their independence. This is before Guyana has its independence.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of era, in the late 50s, early 60s, when countries are talking about these issues of the British Empire and shaking off the British Empire and so on. And he was very consistent that he had to break away from that European and Western influence and
Yeah.
find our own way, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I try to reflect in the book something of his angst about that
Right.
and
Right.
how he came to reconcile it with his return to Guyana and Guyana's independence and so on.
You live a colorful life. We come to that a little bit later, but he also fought with that in his first novel, Other Leopards. The
Yes.
character Leonard and Lobo.
Lobo.
Right,
Yes.
right. So he was also searching for place identity.
Absolutely. And it's quite interesting, obviously as a child, you're not understanding all of this, but um, I had the opportunity before he died to just sort of sit down with him and really talk this through the Lionel Lobo kind of angst.
Aha.
And the way he explained it, and I tell this story in the book about him seeing himself reflected in a mirror when he's in Wales and sort of tearing off his clothes and saying, I can't live like this, like there's this influence on me. I've got to sort of free myself up from it. And of course, that's in his first novel, The Leopards, as you say, that tension is reflected.
Yeah. Right. Is that same sort of angst you were going through, searching for your identity?
So yeah, so I kind of picked up, that this is what's going on in the backdrop for me, and in a way, it, it's a kind of shadow over my story as well. Thinking about, how do I fit? Where do I belong? How can I make sense of this dual heritage and so on? But again, I think in another way, it's different. You know, I was quite firmly rooted in my schooling, through my schooling in North Wales, and it had my sisters and my wider family. And of course, what you're seeking to do is kind of add on your heritage that you haven't necessarily had in your formative years.
Whoa, sounds interesting. I said earlier you lived a colorful life. You're moving from place to place. And you're fortunate to move with him to Africa and back to Guyana. Um, and then he sent you back home to find your identity. Anyway,
Yeah.
you come from a family of writers. You did say something about sisters and wider family.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know for a fact that Evelyn Williams wrote about your father, right?
Yes. The first book that we did on Denis, I and my sister Evelyn did a collection of essays that we brought together from academics and writers that had contributed, and we thought it was time to consolidate this work and bring it together.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, then Evelyn did a book on his art in
His
particular. So she
his
did a
art.
catalogue raisonné
Right.
and then expanded it to a discussion of his art, which is a lovely book. And then my sister Isabel most recently has written a memoir. I don't know that book very well, but I know she has contributed. So yeah, we're all writing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know of that book, Isabel Adonis. I'm writing the book, and um, your father played a great influence in you. What about your mother? The influence of your mother.
Yes, yes. Um, Again, marvelous memories. And as I said, I lost my mum back in the early 2000s. She was a huge influence on us all. Um, a kind of natural philosopher, somebody who had a big world view, very outgoing, a very strong sense of herself as Welsh, her Welshness,
Uh-huh.
bilingual, of course. She spoke Welsh at home. And she gave us not only a love of the country of Wales, but
Uh,
also a perspective of how Wales fitted into a wider world.
mm, mm-hmm.
And it's Sugar and Slate. I make those kinds of connections between Wales and its wider global presence,
Yeah,
including, of course, uh, in Guyana.
yeah. You had a lot to say about Guyana.
Yes.
Yeah,
But the thing about the Sugar and Slate that I tried to do is in the structure of the book, I tried to show that kind of mixed experience. So the book's divided into three kind of parts where I talk about Africa,
yeah,
Guyana, and Wales.
yeah.
And it reflects that big triangular trade, of slavery that we have as part of our ancestry.
We know that
The
triangle.
way in which,
Yeah.
yeah, the way in which the British Empire has expanded across Africa and across the Caribbean and so on and so forth. So I'm trying to reflect that big story as the backdrop to my own personal story.
Oh, interesting.
And when I'm in Guyana, I'm talking about Wales, and when I'm in Wales, I'm talking about Africa and so on. So I try to show that all of those elements of heritage
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
belong in what makes me me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right, right, right. I've met Tony, and I've close relationship with Jennifer Wishart. I've met Tony
Yes,
when she was donating something to the Ministry of Culture, and I know Jennifer
yes,
quite a long time. So
yes.
yeah.
Now, these are my father's second marriage is Tony Williams, and then his third relationship with Jennifer Wishart.
Yeah.
Now, we are a very rich Caribbean family for this because there's 11 of us from these three families. We all get together. We still see each other. Tony's now in Nottingham in the UK with the family around her, and we go there and spend time.
Wow.
And then recently, Jenny's daughter Kibby, my sister Kibby Larry, came out here to Australia to spend time with me. So we're very rich in that big Caribbean family.